There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
From Mamamia, you are listening to No Filter and Don't Freak Out. I am not Mia Freedman. I am Holly Wainwright. And if you listen to some of Mamamia's other shows, like Mamamia Out Loud, for example, you would know that I've been sitting across from Mia Freedman now for 6 years, probably, talking about everything from politics to feminism to sex to kids to everything. But something that Mia and I very rarely talk about is business. And that's why I was really excited to sit down with her to do this very special episode of No Filter that I think will be interesting to anyone who wants to know more about how women start a business, scale a business, run a business while still doing all the things. Because the thing about Mia, who is my boss and my friend and people would know is a very creative, prolific content creator, she is also, and she hates this word, which is why I'm going to use it just to annoy her, she's also a bit of a mogul. She is the co-founder and the chief creative officer and basically the non-stop engine behind Mamamia, which includes a very famous website, 34 weekly and daily podcast episodes, countless newsletters, social media platforms that reach millions of women. We now run summits, we run courses, and all of those things at some point have Mia's fingerprints on them. And they all come back to the origin story of her sitting on her living room floor, cutting out some letters with scissors. So I was delighted to get an opportunity to sit down and learn about Mia Freedman, the businesswoman. That makes her sound like a Barbie, like business Mia. But this is like Mia with her business hat on. We're going to talk about networking. We're going to talk about technology. We're going to talk about how you know what you can't do, when you should outsource and when you should push through. It's a really interesting conversation. I've been talking to Mia for years and I learned things I did not know. So settle in and enjoy this very special No Filter with me, Holly Wainwright, interviewing Mia Freedman. Mia Freedman, why do you hate the movie The Intern so very much? The one with Anne Hathaway and Robert De Niro when he's her intern.
Becky, I want you to let Ben give you a hand, okay? And CC him on all my emails. Did we get yesterday's numbers?
Yes, we did. I saw them here. Here you go.
Thanks. And I need to go over the data on customer purchase patterns. Let Ben take a look at that too. Actually, let Ben take a look at that first. Don't worry, Becky, backup's good.
I remember really clearly sitting in the audience at the actual movies with my best friend Paula watching that film, eating popcorn, and hissing to her, "This is a terrible message." And she was just like, "What are you talking about? We're watching a stupid film, like, shut up." But that is because the message of this film, it was loosely based on the woman who coined the term girl boss, a woman called Sophia Amoruso, who started out selling secondhand clothes on eBay and ended up establishing a big fashion empire called Nasty Gal, and she wrote a book called Girl Boss. It was in the sort of early noughts or mid-noughts, and that's when people started talking about what the girl boss was. And the premise of this film was that Anne Hathaway, who was the girl boss, she'd built this company and the board was trying to encourage her to appoint a CEO because she was the CEO of the company at that time because she'd been the founder. And she sort of reluctantly stepped aside, and Robert De Niro, who was there, and the whole joke was that he was an elderly intern because there was some senior citizens program, became her mentor and was sort of trying to empower her to step back into the role of CEO and own her power. And I was sitting in the audience hissing at my friend Paula that it was a terrible message because I don't always believe that the right thing for the founder of the company is to be also running the company, which is what the CEO does.
Because the premise of that movie, and I would have thought the reason why some people would is they go, but nobody knows the business better than the founder.
It's very true. But what makes you a good founder usually doesn't make you a good CEO because, first of all, startup culture, which is what a founder does, you need to have a vision. You need to be a little bit crazy. You need to often have not a very good concept of how risky something is. Because if you did, you probably wouldn't have started the business in the first place. You would have just stayed working for someone else. So all of those things are great characteristics of an entrepreneur and a founder. But once the business has started to scale up, and it's not just 5 people in a basement anymore, or, 10 people in a garage, or 1 person in their own lounge room, there are different skills that are required to grow and scale a business and run a business day to day. And what really infuriates me is a narrative that I see in the media that when a female founder steps aside as CEO, it's always heralded as the death of the girl boss and this really negative thing as though she's somehow failed. And when you look at the male founders who have stayed as CEO, like Adam Newman from WeWork, Travis Kalanick from Uber, it hasn't gone very well.
Yep.
And that's exactly why, because as a founder, your vision is not necessarily what it takes to be the CEO and run the company.
I think a lot of people would assume you are the CEO, though. So who is the CEO of Mamamia?
So Jason Levine is my co-founder and also husband. We went to a meeting in the early days of Mamamia, the earliest days when it was literally just the 2 of us in the lounge room instead of me alone. And we had this meeting, and at the end, this person said, it's so interesting hearing about the business. How do you two know each other? And we went, we're married. And she goes, I didn't realize that. And we were like, either we're very professional or we've got no chemistry. So he had a lot of business experience and I didn't. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have any time or inclination to know. And when I say, I was running a business at magazines, you do also still have a finance department and a legal department and all of that. And I'd never run a business before and he had. So not only did he have the business experience, he had the strategic vision for the company. So I'm not good at imagining the future and mapping a path to get there. So startup culture I love, which is all move fast, break things. It's really intense. It's very hands-on. But to scale up and grow a business, I literally could never have done that. You can't move fast and break things when you've got 100 people working for you. You need an HR department and a travel policy and an office manager and all of those kinds of things that I've got no interest in knowing or learning. And also you need to be I don't like spreadsheets. I'm allergic to them. So Jason has always had the vision for the business. At the start, my ego was insecure about not being the boss and not being the CEO until I realized that I really didn't want to be and couldn't be, and that was not what I offered the business. So in actual fact, as co-founders, I give myself a different title all the time. I think at the moment it's Chief Creative Officer. But really now I just say co-founder because it's enough. I don't have anything to prove. I carry a lot of weight in terms of the public face of the business, which is a heavy load to carry and very stressful because if Mamamia does something, if we have a mistake, and of course we're a company run by humans, there are always going to be mistakes made, but it will be my face out there. He carries the weight of the business. And, through COVID, we were terrified. We had 130 employees and he and I had the responsibility, and I'll say more so him, of the livelihoods of those people at a time at the beginning of the pandemic when no one knew what we were going to come out with on the other side and many businesses went under. And he was the most extraordinary, calm leader of the whole business and me through that whole time. So, I think for us, the yin and yang really works.
So you didn't start your career in business as it goes. You started your career as a journalist and then an editor and then a bit of a superstar editor and then you went to work in TV, and your sort of origin story is quite well known. When did you know that you were an entrepreneur?
Well, I didn't want to be an entrepreneur. I was forced into it.
Tell me that story.
My husband was always an entrepreneur. He's always worked for himself and he was in the liquor industry and he had a successful business while I had my whole career since I was 19 years old worked actually for the same company, for ACP or the Packer family or whatever it was called at the time. And I'd worked my way up from an intern and I got a sense really up close of what all the bad things were about being an entrepreneur, because we always used to joke that I would sleep a lot better than Jason because when it's your business and your money that's on the line, you lie awake at night. But there were some big crises that had been instigated by me when I was a magazine editor that I didn't lose a lot of sleep over, not because I wasn't upset, but because the stakes didn't include my money. Like the time that I published a sealed section about oral sex lessons and people complained and the whole magazine had to be withdrawn from sale at Coles and Woolies, and that cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I felt terrible. It's not that I didn't care. I did. And it was a mistake that I really sort of regretted, but I knew I wasn't going to lose my house over it, or that I wasn't going to get the sack over it, or that I wasn't going to have to sack other people because there was no business anymore. And when you run a business and own a business, that's how you feel. So I never wanted to, in the same way that Jason never wanted to work for someone else. And sometimes I'd see the good things about his life. Like he'd say to me, I'd be like, oh, I'm so bored, I've got nothing to do, whatever, today. And he'd be like, well, just come home. And I'm like, I can't. Like, even though there's technically nothing for me to do today, I have to be seen to be here because I'm not the boss. And I can't just take holidays whenever I want to, or take the day off whenever I want to. And he found that something that was a real negative. So I had a really clear sense of the liabilities and assets of both positions. But I always assumed I'd work for someone else until I couldn't. Until I went to Channel 9, it became untenable and I had to leave. I didn't want to go back to magazines, but I couldn't stay where I was. So what I thought I'd do is do a blog for a little while until I got offered another great job in media, which I assumed I would because I'd had a really good reputation up until then. I'd been really successful in magazines. But my time at Channel 9, even though it was 7 months, had been so diabolically bad and played out in the media so badly for me, and all the PR around me leaving made it seem like I'd sacked and failed, which I absolutely had. It had been a disastrous job for me. The phone never rang. So I kind of just had to keep going.
So you became an accidental entrepreneur.
I really did.
I even struggled to say the word entrepreneur.
I really did, and I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I've always thought of myself as a writer.
But I work with you, obviously, very closely and have done for nearly a decade. And to me, you are clearly entrepreneurial. Right. And sometimes when we're looking to hire people at Mamamia, you'll say, we need someone who's entrepreneurial. Right. The reason I say that about you is you are a creative person. And traditionally people think creative people are terrible at business, and maybe they are, maybe they're not. But you never stop looking for the next thing, right? Which is a very entrepreneurial trait, right? You're always going, that could be that, and that could be that, and why don't we make that out of that? Have you always been that, or did you learn that?
No, I've always been that. And you can be entrepreneurial in someone else's business, and you can rise through the ranks that way. Like I would have crawled over broken glass to save Kerry Packer $5. And I was always looking for the next thing. And it's interesting, I think magazine editors, particularly in the 80s and 90s, were really disparaged, often by print journalists who thought that, we just had lunches and wore high heels and commissioned stories about nail polish. When you were editing a magazine back then, you were running a business. You were responsible for the P&L. You were responsible for the fact that not enough ad pages had come in. So what can you do to attract more advertisers? What can you put on the cover to sell as many copies as possible? So we were running businesses that were generating millions of dollars. Even though I was 25, 24, I was responsible, and I had bosses, of course, but ultimately the buck stopped with me, for better and worse. So it's not like I didn't have any business experience. I did, but it's not what fueled me.
Yeah. It's interesting because that attitude to disparage magazine editors hasn't really gone away. I don't see it so much anymore, but until recently people would often still describe you as a mummy blogger.
Yeah, no, it still happens.
Or talk about Mamamia as if it's some kind of cute little passion project of yours, when actually it is now a sizable media empire with many arms.
Sometimes people still like to call it a blog.
Do you see yourself as a media mogul though?
In the last,
mogul.
That's funny. I'm such a mogul. In the last year or two, I've started saying I co-own a media company, and it's felt really good. And I think for a long time I didn't dare say that because it felt presumptuous, it felt boastful, it felt dangerous, because there's nothing more dangerous to be than a high-profile woman in business, particularly if that business is profitable. And it's terrible.
Why do you say that?
Because you are the tallest of poppies. When I say the tallest of poppies, not that you are better than a man owning a business, you are just more, well, because you are more unusual, back to the death of the girl boss era, there was no girl boss era. There were a couple of women who founded companies that were successful, but we know their names because there were not that many of them. So you stick out, you know, that awful expression, very Australian, you stick out like dog's balls. And that's vulnerable because it's much more interesting for people to cut you down. So I think we internalise as women, particularly in Australia, you've got to always be self-deprecating. You've got to always be a small target.
So you became a media mogul, almost accidentally, as you tell it.
I reject the mogul because the other
It's a
thing about
silly
running a
word.
business is you always feel like it could go away at any moment. And we've had some really difficult times here, particularly in this media climate, as you and I both know. The threat of cancellation is ever present. And so the idea of a mogul to me is a guy with a cigar on a yacht. And I kind of don't feel that. I feel very much like a working journalist.
Okay, but you are. And I would say that your success is unconventional in several ways. But another one of them I was thinking about before is that you are incredibly well connected, but you actually hate networking, right? You're not someone who's out schmoozing all the time. Can you imagine? You don't take invites, you don't do lunches, you don't do coffees, you don't do a lot of those things that people say, you know, this is what you have to do. Talk to me about being like an introverted hustler.
It's funny, isn't it? Because both Jason and I, my husband and co-founder, are deeply antisocial and very introverted. I'm an extroverted introvert. I get drained by not being in the office because that gives me energy, but by doing all that stuff. It doesn't come easily to either of us. There's a certain amount of it involved, but fortunately he takes the heat on that one more than me.
But for people who think they have to do that, you know, who are looking at successful people and they're like, I've got to network, I've got to build my connections, but I hate it. What would you say?
I understand. I think it's important to have a network, but the idea of networking makes you think of standing around with business cards and a drink after work or, you know, playing golf, but who does that? So I think it's important to know people and connect with people. But if you're running a business, usually your time is spent in that business. And to me, that's my happiest place. And that's also the place that I feel that I add most value is in the office, even though some people in the office may disagree with me and would love it if I was out networking a bit more. Relationships are always important, though, in your industry.
But you've built a lot of them, I would say, via social as well, right? Like in a non-traditional way.
That's so true, which is very female.
Yeah.
So I think that networking also favours the confident, favours people who don't have family commitments, certainly favours people who don't have to go home to young children or don't want to go home to young children perhaps because it happens after hours. And so there are ways, you know, some of my closest friends, people that I know, you can just slide into someone's DMs. Like Instagram's a glorious thing. Even now, I've just decided, not from a networking point of view, but from a support, like-minded point of view, I've just started sliding into the DMs of women that I would like to know and saying, can we be friends? Like a kindergarten child. And it mostly works. Occasionally it doesn't, which is fine. I think it certainly helps. But also, just because I've been around for so long, I've been in the industry for 30 years. So just by sticking around, you end up knowing lots of people in high positions. You know, I saw someone yesterday who is the head of Foxtel, Amanda Lang, and she's someone who I worked with her husband at Clio. He was the art director. Then she was the general counsel at ACP, and then we were at Nine together. So you find that you kind of go up through the ranks with a lot of people. If you stay in the same country, I know it's different for you because you immigrated, but if you stay in the same industry, in the same country, you just sort of accidentally know lots of people.
All right. Another way that you are an unusual entrepreneur, I would say, is that because you are primarily a creative, but I see you adapting to things like technology, getting your hands dirty, and like this must come from when you first built the blog, right? Is that you had to learn how a CMS worked.
I know.
Which is
Content
not,
management
I mean,
system.
this
Had to
is-
learn what a CMS was.
So this is different. I mean, as you were saying before, being a magazine editor is actually a multifaceted job that you have to do a whole lot of things, but you don't necessarily have to be massively technologically savvy. And often, I mean, we
Not at
know,
all.
I've heard you interview high profile business people who say they don't even have email.
Yeah.
And it boggles all of our minds. But you are the opposite of that. You are, I want to know how the EDM server works. I want to know how that social media platform works. Was that always in you, or have you learned how important it is to know how everything works?
I find that as a manager or as a leader, if you don't know how it works, it's hard to tell people what you want or even to know what you want. And I apply this to parenting as well. When parents used to say, oh, I don't understand social media. I'm like, you can't make the rules if you don't understand the game. And so for me, I like keeping that part of my brain busy. And it also means that I can get in there and do the things myself. One of the reasons that I started Mamamia and moved away from my career as a media executive is that I got tired of teaching people how to paint the painting from behind glass instead of me just grabbing the paintbrush and being able to paint it myself sometimes. And so my brain needs that. I'm never happier than when I'm on the tools, as you know, and that can be really challenging for the people around me because it's like, I asked you if I could talk to the team this week because I'm like, they're probably wondering, why is Mia in the bloody back end building newsletters? What on earth is going on? And I had to explain that that was something that I saw and I wanted to understand better because I saw this movement, or I want to understand how to do Instagram stories or make a TikTok video. Even if I'm not going to do that all the time, I want to understand how to actually do it.
So a large part of your business has become recently talking to other women about starting businesses, right? Because back to my point earlier about how you never really stop thinking of the next thing. You invented Lady Startup. You spent a couple of years immersed in talking to women who wanted to do what you had done and built what you have done. When women are like, Mia, how do I start my own business? Do you ever just really want to be like, don't?
That's so funny. No, because what I know is that you don't have to want to build a business the size of Mamamia. There are lots of women who run really small businesses, maybe as a side hustle, you know, they're called micro businesses often. And it just might be making earrings and designing T-shirts and selling them on a website. And what that does is it gives them identity, it gives them purpose, it gives them a way to express their creativity. And it doesn't have to be their day job, but there are so many reasons beyond just making money why women start businesses. And it's a little bit like when people used to say, I want to start a blog or now a podcast. I'm like, go for it, but don't do it because you think you're going to make money, because you probably won't. But if you still want to do it, I mean, you might, which is great, but if that's your only reason for doing it, it's going to be an uphill slog.
When people say, I want to be my own boss so I can keep my own hours so I don't, like, what do you say to them about the toll it can take?
That's true, because I think that particularly for women, every study shows that women will sacrifice money in exchange for control of their hours. So it's flexibility. So it's not even working part-time. They just want to have the ability to control their hours. So if, say, their kid's sick or they need to take their mum to a medical appointment, they can do that and make up the time later and not have to ask, plead, you know, feel guilty, feel ashamed. And so what working for yourself does is it allows you to have a degree of control over your hours, but you will be doing more hours, many, many more hours.
Many.
Here's
one of the things I think defines entrepreneurial business people. To me, I'm like, when does it stop? Like, do you know very many successful business people who ever go, I have this end goal in mind for exactly when everything is the right size and it's the sweet spot, and that's when I'm either going to walk away or when I'm going to do something else or when I'm just going to keep it like that? Or is it like the Harbour Bridge in that it never ends? Like, what do you think about when is it over?
Yeah. See, I'm terrible at answering those questions. People will often ask entrepreneurs after they've scaled up, what's your exit strategy? I've never had one, really. I'm happiest when I'm in the weeds. And that's why Jason and I are such a good team, because if it was just me on my own, I would have just burnt out pretty soon after he came on board, which was about 1.5 years after I started the blog. We complement each other so well in terms of he's the visionary, he's the strategist. So at a certain time, he will say, and it'll be interesting if we're both not ready at the same time, because I obviously get much more out of it from a personal fulfillment point of view. For him, we're both very passionate about the business, but I'm a woman making content for women, of which I am a woman who also consumes the content. So for me, it's incredibly satisfying and in a different way to him. But I honestly couldn't say. I couldn't say. All I know is that I get bored easily and I have to keep making startups within Mamamia.
Yeah, which is something you've done very much in the last few years with summits, with Lady Startup, even with podcasts when it started.
I can't keep doing the same thing again and again. And I wrote on the website and edited the website and oversaw the website for so many years, and now nothing gives me more joy than not knowing what's going to be on the website on any given day, and I discover it just like anyone else. And it's been like that for years because of people like you, because of the editorial team. I know that you guys know more about that than me now and can do a much better job than I ever could, and that gives me the most joy. Feeling that I have to do all the things is never a good place for me, and thankfully it hasn't been like that for a really, really long time. So I'm luckily at this point in the business where I can just follow my instincts and my curiosity and just create.
Few very quick questions to finish, quick fire round. Going into business partnership with your significant other, brilliant idea or terrible idea?
Both. Sometimes I think that if a relationship is like a tyre, and you've only got so many kilometres that you can do before the tyre wears out, does being in business mean that we're just going to wear out a lot faster than if we weren't working together? So there's that. There's also the fact that, because I can only speak for our business, but I imagine it would be similar for other businesses, building Mamamia has been and is so all-consuming that if it had only been one of us, I just don't know how we could have done it. I mean, even if the other one was just a stay-at-home, full-time primary carer of the kids and all of that, just a support person, which neither of us would have been prepared to do, it would have been incredibly disbalanced. So for us, as difficult as it has been with the lows and the highs and the stresses and it being 24/7, we're both always pulling in the same direction. So we're never competing. So when it's like one of the kids is sick today, who's going to stay home with one of the kids? It's never, well, my job's more important than yours, or what am I going to say to my boss? And I know that in most couples that's a real stress and there's competition between whose job takes priority. But for Jason and I, we don't have that. It's tough on our kids. You know, they are so bored of hearing about work. And of course, their older brother works in the business as well.
Do you have boundaries about talking about work? Do you say not at the dinner table, not after 9 o'clock? Do you do that?
Do you know we have, without even saying it, implemented things like we don't talk about it in bed anymore. We are very careful because sometimes one of us will be in the headspace when we're at home. Like it might be a weekend, it might be late at night, it might be in bed, and the other one won't be. The other one will be trying to switch off. So if you just launch into work mode, it can feel really intrusive to the other person. So now we're much more careful about that. If we both want to talk about work and the kids are around now, I mean, it's been their whole life. I mean, Remy's 13 and Mamamia's 15 or 16 or something. Coco's that age too. So Coco was tiny when we started. They know nothing else. So we're more aware than we ever have been, I'd say, in the past of just going, not much fun for the kids, not that interesting.
Do you ever let yourself look around and just feel proud?
Yeah, sometimes I do. I don't tend to look back. I'm always looking forward, and I don't often enough see what's right. I see what's still left to do and what could be better, and that is a really difficult quality for those around me that I work with because it can seem like it's never enough. So I'm really pushing myself. But it's also what
pushes everybody forward all the time.
Yeah, it is. And I think that most business owners will tell you that they don't spend enough time going, well, this is a moment. because you're always looking forward and you're always racing forward and putting out fires and trying to forge a new path. But there are times often when someone else will see it, because of course I swim in it, so I don't notice the water, but often when someone will come in, someone I know will come in for a podcast interview or someone I don't. And, Gladys Berejiklian will come in and go, oh my God, this is amazing. Or a journalist will come in and go, wow, this is bigger than Fairfax. Then I go, wow, yeah, I guess it is.
What's the best advice you've got for a woman who wants to start a business?
Oh, just do it. Don't die wondering. Just do it. It might not work, but that's okay. We talk a lot about flirting, failing and learning, which is something that I didn't coin. Someone I used to work with did, and it's a really good way to make yourself feel better about failing. Turning it into a silly word and saying you'll learn something. But in all seriousness, it actually is, because at the time, no one wants to fail, but you will always learn something from it. And I remember that Poppy King once said to me, success just reaffirms what you already know about yourself. Failure is the only true teacher. That's a piece of business advice I always like to remind myself of when I'm failing.
Well, look, as I said at the start, during that conversation with somebody that I talk to all the time, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about Mia, I learned a lot about business, and I got tips that I am going to pick up and follow. If you loved it, share it with a friend, tell people about it, and of course, rate and review. This episode of No Filter was produced by Gia Moylan, and the executive producer is Liz Ratliff.